Starix is a player who's something of a stickler for the rules. He has a set idea about how the game should be played and exactly what you should do. But I heard a great saying once about rules that it's actually most important not to know the specifics or the detail of a rule, but rather to know the spirit of the rule, what the intention is behind it, what ultimately it's trying to communicate, so that then you can pick apart like little subjective aspects, idiosyncrasies of a player, and you can see why they want to do something a particular way and what makes sense, what the merit is to it. And at Boomeo, they have players explaining the way they think about the game, what they do within the game, and the reasons why, so that you can take away the spirit of what they're saying rather than just specifics of what they as a player might do. So if you want to join in kind of the spirit of how to improve your game at CSGO, just do it at Boomeo. Fucking hell, I am good at this shit. I got that advertising piff, homie. So anyway, starix, enough of that. Starix has joined Team Spirit, and that draws to a close the whole question of where would starix go after departing from Nartas Fincer, where he was previously the coach. Obviously, starix, veteran, legendary 1.6 player, winning many majors, 4 majors in a row, in fact, with Nartas Fincer. Even going back to that, was a player within the first ever Ukrainian team to place top 3 at a major, winning the bronze medal at WCG 2007 with Amazing Gaming, where he played alongside Blade, now in-game leader of Flipside. And now he joins Team Spirit as a player, not even just as the coach. And this is a team who at the moment are looking to go through the CIS minor, hoping they can get to the qualifier. They're not a team that's particularly high up in the world. Even within the CIS region, they're not considered a top team in any sense. Obviously, starix was previously in Na'Vi, but in CSGO, he started out as a player, coming over with the 1.6 lineup intact initially, and he remained a player until the spring of 2015 when they brought on board Flamey over from Hellraisers, and had previously been on what had essentially been Flipside, where it was that team. And then starix moved into a coaching role. But initially, it appeared, since Zeus was the general in-game leader, the guy, I mean, as in like a general, not just the general in-game leader, it appeared as though mainly the coaching for the first sort of 6 months or so involved starix working with Flamey, who was replacing him and kind of integrating him into the team. And he certainly seemed to improve Flamey in that respect and get him a little bit on track. But the key detail is that in late 2015, starix took over as the in-game leader. And when he did this, because at the time, people who were out-of-game coaches could be an in-game leader, then we saw Na'Vi really go to the next level. And first and foremost, it was with Flamey's appearance. You remember famously when Guardian took them to the final of Cluj-Napoca, the last major in 2015, it was Guardian on his own pretty much. He was hard carrying, and Flamey had series like against Nip where he looked amazing, and then the finals he was non-existent against Envious. But you look at Flamey at the end of the year, ESL Pro League Season 2 finals, he's an absolute monster, the MVP of the whole tournament. You saw that, in some senses, starix, having worked with Flamey, seemed to bring him into the picture as a star player. And so in the 2016 era of Na'Vi with all their top 2s and top 4 facings, this is when Flamey was most effective and when Na'Vi looked better than they've ever looked in CSGO. Yes, Guardian was a superstar player, but in large part, it was thanks to starix's in-game leading, which took Zeus's in-game leading to some sort of other level and made Zeus just a support player. And it took out the whole equation that when starix had been a player, he was a support element. So now you're working with more stars. And we saw people like Seized at their best, Guardian at their best, Flamey at their best. And starix was well hailed as one of the best in-game leaders in the world. In fact, there was a time that I think it was between him and Fallen as to who the best in-game leader was. And I could have definitely made the case for starix as the best in-game leader, except that the edge I always thought Fallen had was that Fallen was a superstar as well. But then again, we hear some of the other things from later on, like Cold Zero was doing part-time calling at times. They taught the players the theory and they played it out. And some of that maybe takes away some of the control as an in-game leader. Whereas famously, the engine of Na'Vi was that slow, methodical build-up, piece by piece constructed to put Guardian in position and then to execute onto sites and to get a lot of success and win out T-sides off Cobble, Train, etc. and become one of the best teams in the world and vie for major titles. Now, the problem is starix remained the in-game leader right up until recently, until IEM Katowice. And what happened was, late last year, after Zeus was removed, so after E-League Season 1, Simple was brought in, and immediately before they could play an offline tournament, Valve made a coaching rule change saying that the out-of-game coach couldn't be the in-game leader. He could only talk on certain timeouts and otherwise could not speak during the rounds. So that immediately cut the legs out from under Na'Vi, and particularly starix, obviously, because he couldn't be the in-game leader, and they'd lost their former in-game leader in Zeus, so they couldn't just revert back to him. And now they were left with a team with very few supportive elements, no traditional in-game leader, no in-game leader who'd been an in-game leader of Na'Vi and very successful. Sees that had a very short tenure, late 2013, it hadn't been very successful. And so they had an abundance of stars as well, and particularly Simple, a very difficult star to deal with, and one who hasn't fully integrated into any team in history, actually, and been both amazing and on an amazing team consistently, not just individual tournaments. So this was an incredibly difficult challenge for starix, and he wasn't able to overcome it. Yes, the team was able to win ESL 1 New York, their first 250k or more tournament. Yes, they were able to have times when they looked pretty good, blitzing through the E-League major group stage, but in general, the first part of their period, after some initial successes, they dropped off massively, weren't getting out of group stages, weren't qualifying for offline tournaments. Then they came into the phase in 2017 where they would blitz through group stages, get to the playoffs, and always lose in the playoffs. Now, yes, they would sometimes lose to Astralis, hardly a bad team to lose to. They were the team winning most of the tournaments. But even so, they weren't really pushing Astralis to the limit and having a proper chance to win these matches. And they weren't winning best of 3 series. And so starix was eventually let go after, a solid 8 or 9 months of getting to work with this lineup as just a coach and not the in-game leader. They let him go, and they got in Andy, who was the consultant of Na'Vi, and they said, right, we're going to make this guy the head coach. It worked well at Star Series Season 3. It hasn't worked so far when they went to DreamHack Tours, but that's a different story because that's the Na'Vi story. Beyond that, people were wondering, where is starix going to go? And that's the interesting detail, because we can't just look at starix joining Spirit in the context of what is starix going to do in Spirit. We have to look at where he could have gone. Now, I know for a fact, because I actually myself helped some people reach out to starix, that he had offers to coach and be a coach again in NA, to coach into multi-international teams. A bunch of teams around the world respected starix's knowledge about the game, his way of thinking about the game, and kind of his disciplined approach, and would have wanted this guy as a coach in their team. He also had offers, at least people were willing to talk about it, of him even going into foreign lineups, not CIS region lineups, as a player and being the in-game leader, as you now see he's going to do in Team Spirit. But I mean, I'm talking about bigger name teams and just coming back as a player so he could actually be the full-on in-game leader, which I certainly thought both routes had their merits. Like, he could put him as a coach of a team, and if he could work with the right team, I thought he could find success. I also thought some teams that had really good players but not a good in-game leader, so NA in particular, could have used him absolutely as a player and just make him the more supportive element and have him in-game lead from inside the game. I thought that really could have been a shot in the arm for some of those skilled teams that don't have the leadership. So I have to say, in as much as none of those moves came to pass and he instead went to Team Spirit, I am disappointed. I am underwhelmed. Now, obviously, yeah, I want to see what he can do here, but I feel as though in those other teams, he could have had an immediate impact. He could have immediately been playing in majors or potentially playing in majors. He could have immediately been coaching in majors or potentially coaches in majors, like at the qualifier level or at the major level. With this Team Spirit, we don't even know that they'll make it to the major qualifier. If they do, they are very unlikely to get through the major qualifier, despite what starix brings to the table. So this is really a long-term approach. Coming back to play and being the in-game leader, it feels to me like Existence going to LDLC, except the difference is when Existence went to LDLC, he didn't have any other options at that point in time, assuming he didn't want to move abroad. So going to LDLC, that was his initial only option. But then when he got the option to potentially go up to Envious, he turned it down. That's the move that this feels like right now, where starix could have gone to a better team as a player or a coach, and instead he chose to stick in CIS region and to go over to Spirit and start something new. So I feel like he's gambling a lot of his future and the notion he can improve this team a lot, and I don't know that it's actually warranted in either respect yet. Now, Spirit as a team, yes, we saw them at the major qualifier. I mean, admittedly, why were they at the major qualifier? Why were Vega Squadron at the major qualifier? Well, we have to be realistic and say that's the flaw, isn't it? That when you have those minors where 2 teams come out of them and they go over to the major qualifier, normally you're expecting from CIS region, okay, that could be like the Gambits of the world, or that could be, it could have been Flipside. But these teams were already qualified from the last major, as well as Na'Vi. So we had 3 CIS teams already qualified, and then Hellraisers, thanks to going a different route, don't actually come from the CIS minor anymore. And so as such, you got teams where there are no good teams left in CIS region, and so those teams were the ones that just happened to go. Now, I will say, considering Spirit finished last place, I don't put a whole lot of blame on them because they did have like one of their second or third best player, Coldy, got his visa denied because famously it can be tough for CIS regions to sometimes get visas to go to America. And so Certus, the manager, had to stand in, and Certus, the manager, did absolutely fucking terrible at this qualifier. I mean, he had like less than 0.4 frags per round. Meanwhile, he was averaging almost 0.9 deaths per round, so he was a massive liability. Admittedly, he shouldn't have to play. We don't expect him to be good, but you can see how with this as a problem, you're not even going to have a shot at doing anything. So in their first game against Dignitas, team that is now North, they managed to get 11 rounds on Mirage. They had a huge game from Davkos to do so, but still, that's just 11 rounds. Ultimately, Dignitas did still cruise to a win on one of their better maps. Then they played against Mouse Sports and Envious on Dust 2, got absolutely destroyed on those maps. I mean, the very fact that they even dare to play Mouse on Dust 2 in that kind of a pick ban where you could have just banned Cash and Murat and Dust 2 against Mouse, I get that maybe they were thinking, oh, well, we have a mixed team, but that's Mouse Sports. You don't let the Nico Mouse Sports go on Dust 2. We've seen what happened to even very good teams when they did that. So they were a waste of time on the other maps. They got destroyed by those teams, and they were just out in last place. Now, first and foremost, when he comes into Spirit starix, the player he's replacing is Kabakin, a player who formerly was in Na'Vi in late 2013, where he joined with C's, and he's been around the Russian, the CIS Counter-Strike scene back into the end of 1.6, and I actually thought he was a decent enough player, especially among the people they had in this team. I thought he's a player who actually, not just for name value, he could definitely be thrown in the mix and be used. So I have to say, I wonder why Kabakin's the one leaving, because I would say of this lineup, keep Kabakin in. starix knows him, starix has played with him, maybe they can work with him. Now, maybe there's some politics there I'm not aware of from the CIS region, but I would have thought that would be a plus to have two experienced players in the team. So once you get Kabakin out of the team and you move starix into the team, you got to look at the other members. Okay, so Davkost, he is the guy where I think it was Semler famously hyped him up that this was going to be like the next CIS talent. And the thing is, online he has had some insane games. Most famously, you'll probably remember Kabakin for standing in for a bunch of better CIS teams at a bunch of events. Like for Flipside, he stood in for tons of events because remember, Simple used to be banned from ESL events over, quite a long period of time, right? So in 2015, he stood in for Flipside at ESL Katowice and ESL 1 Cologne. And then he also played at DreamHack Cluj-Napoca for them, because remember, by that point, Simple had left and he was trying to get to trying to qualify for that with Hellraisers, actually, where he was playing with Oscar, and that didn't happen for him. And he also stood in for Gambit at E-League Season 2. Now, the thing with Davkost is, he's the biggest name aside from starix in this team. I think he is a talent. I mean, I've watched him play over the years, the odd game here and there, and there's a stand-in. And I do think you put him against Tier 2, and he has some redeeming qualities. He can be an explosive AWPer. He can look pretty good. The problem is, first of all, he's the AWPer, and I hate AWPers who only do it against Tier 2. And if you watch him in those big tournaments where he's a stand-in, admittedly, don't expect too much from stand-ins. He never was a star player. And then in other tournaments, he's been decent to above average, but he's never fully shined. So I think starix has got his work cut out with him in as much as Davkost should be the clear star player. But that means that starix has to figure out how to use him a la Guardian of his past team and as an in-game leader. So if he can do that and he can make Davkost into a star, that's kind of a little barometer you can have as to how far this team can go and what a good job starix is doing or not, as the case may be. Beyond Davkost, the rest of them are all... they're all just a bunch of names where I don't really put that much stock in them, quite frankly. Like Sotfik, I always call them Softik. Sotfik and Coldy, you look at some of their games, they looked all right at times, but I certainly wouldn't have ranked them as like top CIS rising talents. Dima is someone where I haven't really seen anything from this guy to suggest he's going to do anything. So the rest of them, I'll say this, it's a blank canvas of starix. If he can work with these players and get them in shape and make them look a lot better, then we'll know he's really done something. So to me, a key aspect of this is starix as a player, because the good thing about him coming back as a player is he can be a full in-game leader now. He can institute his way of playing the game, how he wants to play the game. So as an in-game leader, as I'll get to in a second, I think he can do a lot. Now, as a player, the problem is he is the sort of player who, especially as an in-game leader, I don't see him doing a lot of fragging, because when he previously played in Na'Vi in CSGO, he was the supportive player and he wasn't the in-game leader. And at that point in time, even as just a supportive player, he was a below average fragger. He was never going to put big numbers up. He was a supportive style player, and he was still decent enough at clutches because that was one of his specialties from 1.6, but he didn't have the AWPing that he had from 1.6, and he didn't have the high impact fragging, and he wasn't a hybrid star like he was in 1.6. He didn't have anything from 1.6 basically. He was just an okay player. And it's the fact that he had a long tenure with Zeus and with Edward that I think kept him in the team for a long time and gave them some kind of some kind of synergy, and he knew how Zeus wanted to play. Now, as an in-game leader and a player, that's where I see some problems. He hasn't played properly for quite a while, and I see him as a very average player. I don't think his aim was ever that great in 1.6. His aim looked very average in CSGO. And so, yes, when he played at Malmo last year in 2016, before Guardian arrived for the playoffs, yeah, he did pretty decently there, and he won some clutches, cool. But I don't know that that's going to be a reasonable level to expect out of this guy. In fact, it's not. So I wouldn't expect much of him individually. Now, as an in-game leader, I think he can do a lot, but there's a key qualifier to that, which is, yes, if you gave me the players and I could interview them and then pick out the players to go with starix, I could make you a set of players on this level that would work with him. He'd make them much better. They'd become a lot better. It'd be like an even better version of existence in LDLC in terms of the impact he could have. The problem there is, though, these players have to fit starix's in-game style. And one of the kind of almost paradoxes of starix's in-game style is that he has a very good sense of how to play the game and a methodical approach. And yet most CIS players, from my experience, especially the skilled ones, don't naturally align with that style. And he has to really drill it into them and work with them and win them over. And so just as people in CIS region don't really necessarily want to go and play with Blade, and they think he's a bit outdated, despite the fact I still think he's a good and effective in-game leader, I feel like it's the same thing with starix, but in a different direction. So for me, starix is a guy who has a very strong opinion on how the game should be played, of how he thinks the correct way to play the game is, and he couldn't get that across as just the coach. So as the in-game leader, he's going to have to really find his allies in this team who are willing to buy into that system and to do it all out. Now, maybe going to a lower level team where he's the biggest name, maybe that can get it done, and these guys will listen. But it means that he's going to have to really be given probably 6 months to properly work on these players, because they're not going to be coming out the gate playing his style instantly. I think he can be a Blade in that sense. You give him these lesser players, I think he can make a lot more of them. The problem he has is he has even less talent to work with than Blade. He has way less talent to work with than Zeus. So I do think a very positive aspect of him being the in-game leader, though, is the sheer level he had emphasizing stars under his in-game leading role. Guardian in his Na'Vi was never I've got it the other way around, haven't I? Guardian under Zeus in Na'Vi was never as good as Guardian was under starix in Na'Vi. So you really emphasize Guardian's style. Then you go and you look at Flamey, as I've already alluded to at the beginning of the video. Flamey became a much better. He became a top 5 player in the world under starix's system in a way that actually Zeus had never properly figured out as the in-game leader, never gotten that guy working. So I feel like starix is a guy who can communicate with these guys better. I think overall his vision fits some of the star players better. So when I look at this team, I want to see what can he do to Davcost? What can he do to Coldy? Can Sotfig actually become some kind of an impact player? If he can accomplish things with these players, now we can get to the level where they can qualify from the CIS minor. They can maybe start to play with the flip sides of the world. I don't think they're going to be on the level of Gambit, definitely not on the level of Na'Vi. So there's not a big ceiling for this team, but he's starting at nothing. He's starting with almost a blank canvas from where he's coming from. And I do think he's got chances to do something. And he is a player I respect a lot in terms of how he thinks about the game and his methodical mind for the game. I think is actually quite fascinating. And he's very much improved how to explain himself over the years, even if he is still very set in his ways. So it's tough to get points through to him if you're a player of his. That's my sense from talking to other people.